My lawyer told me to stop talking. I'm going to talk anyway, because in 6 days I have to stand in front of a judge and explain how I ended up living next door to the widow of a man who died on a construction site I was responsible for inspecting, and how I fell in love with her while she was building the wrongful death case that will probably end my career, and how I knew, from the 3rd week, that she'd moved in on purpose, and I stayed anyway. My lawyer says that last part is the problem. I say it's the only honest thing I've ever done. Her name is Dua Rashid. Her husband was Kamran Rashid. He was 31 when a load-bearing scaffold collapsed on the Caspian Heights development site in Lahore on a Thursday afternoon in August, and a steel crossbeam fell 9 stories and killed him before anyone on the ground could shout a warning. He left behind a wife, a 3-year-old daughter named Inaya, and a safety inspection report signed by me, dated 6 days before the collapse, that said the scaffold was structurally sound. The report was a lie. I knew it when I signed it. My name is Asad Mahmoud, and I was the site safety officer for Harman Construction, and the scaffold on Block C of Caspian Heights had been flagged by 2 different laborers in the week before the collapse. Both flags were verbal, workers telling foremen telling supervisors, nobody putting anything in writing because the project was 14 weeks behind schedule and the client had a penalty clause that cost Harman 3 lakh for every week of delay. The site manager, a man named Pervaiz Shah, called me into his office on a Tuesday, closed the door, and said, "The scaffold on C is fine. I need you to sign the inspection confirming it. I haven't inspected it. You don't need to." The scaffolding contractor certified it last month. The contractor certified the initial installation. There have been modifications since then. Additional platforms, heavier loads. The workers are saying the base plates are shifting. Pervaiz leaned back. He was a large man with the patient face of someone who'd had this conversation before and always won. "Asad, the inspection is a formality. You sign it, the work continues. We hit the deadline. You don't sign it, I call head office, they send someone who will, and your contract, which is month to month, as you know, is not renewed. You have a mother in Rawalpindi who depends on your salary. You have a car payment. You have the beginning of a life that requires you to keep getting paid." He said it like arithmetic, not a threat, just math. I signed the report. 6 days later, Kamran Rashid was dead, and the report with my signature was sitting in a file cabinet in Harman's project office, and Pervaiz Shah was on the phone to the company's lawyer before the ambulance had left the site. The investigation was fast and shallow, the way corporate investigations always are when the company is investigating itself. Harman's legal team concluded that the scaffold failure was caused by a material defect in the base plate assembly. The scaffolding contractor's fault, not Harman's. The contractor, a small operation run by 2 brothers, didn't have the resources to fight. They absorbed the liability. Their insurance paid a settlement to Dua Rashid, 42 lakh, which sounds like money until you divide it by the years a 3-year-old needs a father and realize it comes to about 2 lakh per year of absence. I was not named in the investigation. My inspection report was referenced as evidence that Harman had followed proper safety protocols. The report I'd signed without inspecting was now the company's shield, and I was inside it, protected, complicit, and unable to say a word without destroying my own career and possibly facing criminal charges. Pervaiz Shah was promoted to regional safety director 2 months later. He sent me a bottle of whiskey with a note that said, "To a job well done." I poured it down the sink. Then I stood over the drain and listened to the whiskey gurgle away and thought, a man is dead because I signed a paper, and the man who told me to sign it just sent me a congratulations. I requested a transfer to Harman's Islamabad office. I moved out of my Lahore apartment. I wanted distance from the site, from Pervaiz, from the file cabinet where the report lived, from the version of myself who'd signed it. I found a quiet apartment in a residential lane in Garden Town, 2 bedrooms, a small courtyard, a landlord who didn't ask questions. I moved in on a Saturday. On Sunday morning, a woman moved into the apartment next door. She was carrying a toddler on her hip and a box of kitchen supplies, and she looked at me across the shared courtyard wall and said, "I hope you don't mind noise. She's 3. She hasn't learned volume control yet." "I don't mind," I said. She smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind that's been used too often for politeness and not enough for pleasure. "I'm Dua," she said. "This is Inaya." The toddler looked at me with the frank, assessing gaze of a child who hasn't yet learned that staring is rude. She had her father's eyes. I knew this because I'd seen Kamran Rashid's face in the incident report, the photograph stapled to the fatality notification. A passport-style headshot of a man who looked like he was trying not to blink. His daughter had his eyes. She was looking at me with them, and I didn't know yet that her mother had moved in on purpose. But my body knew something. A tightness in my chest. A wrongness. The feeling of a door closing on a room I was already inside. Dua was warm in the way that grief makes people warm. Not from happiness, but from the understanding that warmth is a discipline you practice, because the alternative is a coldness that will swallow everything. She brought me food the first week. Biryani, then nihari, then a plate of cookies Inaya had helped make, which meant they were misshapen and covered in too many sprinkles, and perfect. She invited me for chai. She asked about my work. I told her I was in construction management, which was true in the way that a half-built wall is true, standing but not finished. I asked about her husband. She told me he died in a construction accident. She said the word accident the way you put quotation marks around a word, with your voice, not your hands. "It was a scaffold collapse," she said, "on a site in Lahore. They said it was the scaffolding contractor's fault." She paused. "They say a lot of things." I felt the tightness again. "I'm sorry. Everyone is sorry. Sorry is the cheapest word in the language." She looked at me. "What I need isn't sorry. What I need is someone who knows how construction sites actually work, how inspections are actually done, how reports are actually signed." The sentence landed in my chest like a nail finding wood. "Why do you need that?" I said, carefully, "Because I'm filing a wrongful death suit against the construction company, and my lawyer says the case depends on proving that the safety inspection was inadequate. And I don't know enough about inspections to know what questions to ask." She said it simply, factually, as if she were asking me to explain plumbing. But the air between us had changed, pressurized, the way air changes before weather. "Which company?" I said. I already knew. Harman Construction. The name of my employer. The company whose transfer I was on. The company whose inspection report, my inspection report, was the legal foundation of their defense. "I don't know much about inspections," I lied. It was the second lie I'd told for Harman Construction. It was smaller than the first, but it tasted worse, because this time I was lying to a woman holding cookies her dead husband's daughter had made. The suit was filed. I learned about it not from Dua, but from a company-wide memo that appeared in my inbox on a Monday morning. Harman's legal team notifying all employees that a wrongful death action had been filed regarding the Caspian Heights site, and that no employee was to discuss the project, the incident, or any related documentation with anyone outside the company. The memo was signed by Pervaiz Shah, now Regional Safety Director. I sat at my desk in the Islamabad office and read the memo and looked at the wall and thought, the woman next door is suing my company for her husband's death. and my company is going to defend itself using the inspection report I signed without inspecting. And I am sitting exactly between those two facts, like a man standing on a fault line, waiting for the ground to choose which direction to split. That evening, Dua knocked on my door. She was holding Anaya, who was asleep on her shoulder, one small hand curled around the collar of Dua's camise. "I need to tell you something," she said, quietly, so as not to wake the child. "Can I come in?" She sat at my kitchen table. She laid Anaya on my couch, covered her with my blanket, a gesture so domestic it hurt, and then she sat across from me and said, "I know who you are." The room contracted. "I know you worked at Caspian Heights. I know you were the safety officer. I know your name is on the inspection report that cleared the scaffold 6 days before it killed my husband." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts were loud enough. "I know because my lawyer subpoenaed the project records last month, and your name is on page 14 of the safety log." "How long have you known?" "Since before I moved in." She looked at me. "I chose this apartment because it was next to yours. I found your address through the company directory. It's not hard when you know someone's name. I moved here because I needed to be close to the person who signed the report, to confront me, to understand you." Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. "My lawyer says the inspection report is the cornerstone of Harmon's defense. If the report is legitimate, the company followed protocols and the contractor is liable. If the report is fraudulent, if you signed it without actually inspecting the scaffold, then Harmon is liable for negligent safety oversight, and the settlement I received is a fraction of what Anaya is owed. So you moved next door to get me to admit the report is fake. I moved next door because 42 lakh is not enough to raise a child whose father was killed by a company that sent a man to sign a piece of paper instead of climbing a scaffold and checking whether it would hold." The sentence was surgical. It cut through every layer of self-justification I'd built in the months since the collapse. The eye was pressured. The eye didn't know it would fail. The workers' concerns were just verbal, nothing documented, and left me sitting in the raw fact of what I'd done. I had signed a report that said a scaffold was safe, and a man had climbed that scaffold, and the scaffold had killed him. And I had done this because my site manager told me to, and I was afraid of losing my income. "The report is real," I said. Third lie. I inspected the scaffold. Dua looked at me for a long time. Then she stood, picked up Anaya, and said, "When you're ready to stop lying, I'll be next door." She left. Anaya's hand was still curled around her collar. The blanket on my couch was still warm. She didn't confront me again. That was the strategy, and I recognized it eventually, though it took me weeks. She didn't push, didn't argue, didn't bring up the report. She simply continued being Dua. Bringing food. Inviting me for chai. Letting Anaya play in the shared courtyard while we talked about everything except the thing between us. She told me about Kamran, how they'd met at university, how he'd wanted to be a civil engineer but took the construction job because the pay was immediate and the student loans were not patient, how he'd come home every evening smelling like concrete dust and pick up Anaya and spin her until she screamed with laughter, and how the spinning had become the ritual that Anaya asked for every night at 6, and how after his death Anaya had stood by the door at 6 o'clock every evening for 3 weeks, waiting for the sound of his key. She told me about the morning of the collapse. Kamran had left late, Anaya had a fever, and he'd stayed to make sure the medicine was working. He'd kissed Dua at the door and said, "If she's not better by noon, take her to Dr. Sana at the clinic on Davis Road. Don't wait." Those were his last words to her. Instructions about their daughter's health, not goodbye. Directions, She told me about the day after, how she'd sat in their apartment for 11 hours without moving, Inaya in her lap, watching the sun cross the floor, waiting for someone to come and tell her what to do next. No one came. She'd had to figure it out herself. Kamran's mother had arrived the second day, and the first thing she'd said was not "I'm sorry, but who's paying the rent this month?" Because grief in families without money is immediately administrative. One evening she showed me a video on her phone. Kamran, filmed by a coworker at a site barbecue, dancing badly to a song I didn't recognize, his hard hat on backward, laughing at his own feet. He danced the way some men dance, without skill but with complete commitment, every limb going a different direction. Joy as a construction project. "He danced like this at our wedding," Dua said. 300 people watched. Nobody laughed because he was so genuinely happy that laughing at him would have felt like cruelty. She didn't say, "And you signed a paper that put him on a scaffold that killed him." She never said it. She showed me the video and let the math do itself. A man who danced like that. A man whose daughter stood by the door at 6. A man whose last words were about a doctor for his child. And I had signed a report that said the structure he climbed was safe, without ever touching it. Every story she told was a quiet deposition. She wasn't asking me to confess. She was showing me who Kamran was, not a name on an incident report, not a fatality statistic, but a man who danced badly at barbecues and spun his daughter and wanted to build things that lasted. She was making it impossible for me to keep the lie without looking at the cost. Meanwhile, Harman's legal team was building its defense. I received a call from the company's lawyer, a man named Advocate Junaid, informing me that I would likely be called as a witness. "Your inspection report is central to our position," he said. "When you testify, you'll confirm that the inspection was conducted in accordance with standard protocols." Understood? Understood, good. And Mr. Mahmoud, I'm told you've relocated to Gardentown. Interesting neighborhood. I trust you're not in contact with any parties relevant to the case. The pause was the threat. The trust was the warning. 2 days later, Harman's HR department called. My performance review, which had been consistently positive for 2 years, was suddenly flagged for irregularities in documentation practices. No specifics given. No formal action taken. Just a flag, sitting in my personnel file like a lit match in a paper factory, reminding me that the company could turn the flame up at any time. I hung up and looked at the wall that separated my apartment from Dua's and thought, Harman's lawyer knows where I live. He doesn't know she's next door. Not yet. But when he finds out, and lawyers always find out, he'll argue that Dua moved in to tamper with a witness, and the case will collapse. And Inaya will grow up on 42 lakh in the memory of a father she'll barely remember, a father who danced at barbecues and stood by the door at 6. The clock was ticking. Harman's trial date was set, 4 months away. In 4 months I'd be in a witness box, and Advocate Junaid would ask me whether I inspected the scaffold, and I'd have to say yes or no, and one answer would protect Harman and bury the truth, and the other would bury my career and probably send me to prison for falsifying a safety document. 4 months, 120 days to decide who I was. The decision was made for me, or rather, it was made by a 3-year-old. Inaya had started calling me Asad Bai. She said it with the confident possessiveness of a child who has decided you belong to her world and doesn't need your permission. She brought me drawings, crayon portraits of a house with too many windows, a sun with a face. A tall figure she identified as Baba standing next to a shorter figure she identified as Asad Bai. She'd drawn me into her family portrait, next to her dead father. I looked at that drawing and felt something collapse inside me. Not a scaffold, nothing that dramatic, but something structural. Something that had been holding up the version of myself who could sign a report and walk away and call it survival. The collapse was quiet. It happened in the kitchen. Inaya was on my lap, explaining that the sun had a face because everything has a face. Asad Bai, you just have to draw it, and I looked over her head at Dua, who was standing in the doorway watching us with an expression I couldn't read, not warm, not strategic, something rawer than both, and I said, the report was a lie. Dua didn't move. I never inspected the scaffold. Pervez Shah told me to sign it. I signed it because he said my contract would be terminated if I didn't, and I needed the money. I didn't check the base plates. I didn't check the modifications. I signed a document that said a structure was safe without looking at it, and 6 days later your husband climbed it, and it killed him. Inaya was still on my lap, coloring. She didn't understand the words. She understood the tone, something shifting in the adult world above her head. And she looked up at me and said, "Why are you sad, Asad Bai?" "Because I did something wrong," I said. "And I should have said so a long time ago." Dua crossed the room. She took Inaya from my lap, gently, the way you remove something precious from a surface that might not hold, and she set the child on the couch with her crayons, and came back and sat across from me and said, "I need you to say it again. Slowly. And I need to record it. I know." She pulled out her phone. She hit record. And I said it all. Pervez's office. The closed door. The arithmetic of coercion. The signature. The 6 days. The collapse. I said it in a voice that sounded like mine, but felt like someone else's, the way confession always feels, like you're narrating someone else's crime until the moment you realize the narrator and the criminal are the same person. When I finished, Dua stopped the recording. She sat with the phone in her hand, looking at the screen, and I waited for the thing I deserved. Anger, contempt, the cold efficiency of a woman who'd gotten what she came for. Instead, she said, "Thank you. Don't thank me. I killed your husband. You signed a report. Pervez gave the order. Harman set the schedule. The system killed my husband. You were the part of the system that had a name and a face, and that's why you're the one I needed. Because systems don't testify. People do." Harman's lawyer found out about Dua 3 weeks later. A private investigator, Harman's standard practice for cases above 50 lakh, had been assigned to document the plaintiff's contacts and living situation. He'd followed Dua from her lawyer's office to Garden Town, photographed her entering the building, cross-referenced the address against company records, and found my name on the lease next door. Advocate Junaid called me on a Friday, not at my office number, at my personal phone, which meant he'd obtained it separately, which meant this call was not a company communication, but a message. "Mr. Mahmoud, we're aware that the plaintiff in the Caspian Heights case is your neighbor. We're also aware that you've been in regular social contact with her and her daughter. This creates a significant conflict of interest concern. I didn't know she was the plaintiff when I moved in. That's what I'd advise you to say if anyone asks. But I'm not asking. I'm telling you." His voice dropped to the register lawyers use when they want you to hear the gears turning. "If you change your testimony, if you deviate in any way from the inspection report you signed, Harman will not only terminate you. We will file a criminal complaint for falsification of a safety document under the Pakistan Penal Code. You will be prosecuted. Not the company. You. Your name is on the report. Your signature. The company will position itself as the victim of an employee who filed a fraudulent inspection without authorization. Pervez Shah authorized it. Pervez Shah will deny that. And his word carries the weight of a regional safety director with 15 years of company service, while yours carries the weight of a junior officer on a month-to-month contract who, as the evidence will show, was in a personal relationship with the plaintiff. The trap was elegant. Not just the legal trap, the narrative trap. Junaid wasn't just threatening prosecution. He was building a story in which I was the rogue employee who'd faked a report and then been seduced by the widow into changing his testimony. In that story, Dua wasn't a grieving wife seeking justice. She was a manipulative plaintiff who'd moved next door to compromise a witness. The proximity, the very thing Dua had engineered to reach me, became the weapon Harmon would use to discredit both of us. If I told the truth, Harmon would paint me as a criminal and Dua as a schemer. If I lied, Inaya would grow up on 42 lakh. Either way, the people with the most to lose were the people with the least power. I told Dua that night. She listened without interrupting. She always listened without interrupting, which I now understood was not patience but discipline. The discipline of a woman who'd spent months training herself to hear the whole truth before reacting to any of it. "He's going to sacrifice you," she said. "He's going to try. If you testify against Harmon, they'll prosecute you for the false report. Yes, you'll lose your career. You might go to prison. Yes, and you're going to do it anyway. I signed a paper that killed your husband. The least I can do is sign one that tells the truth about it." She looked at me, and for the first time the architecture of her composure cracked. Not a collapse, just a fissure. A line of light through a wall she'd been maintaining for over a year. Her eyes filled. She didn't wipe them. "I didn't plan for this," she said. "For what?" "For you being someone I couldn't hate. I moved next door to get a confession. I brought you food and let Inaya draw you into her pictures because I needed you close enough to crack. And then you cracked, and I should have felt vindicated, and instead I felt..." She stopped. "I can't say it. Not yet. Not while the case is open. If Junaid finds out, he'll use it to discredit both of us. Then don't say it. I won't." She wiped her eyes. "But I need you to know that Inaya drew you next to Kamran for a reason. Children see things before adults do." The courtroom was cold. That's what I remember. The air conditioning was set too low, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look guilty, which was appropriate. Advocate Junaid put me on the stand first, a strategic choice, because my testimony was supposed to anchor the defense before Dua's lawyer could challenge it. He walked me through the inspection report, line by line, his voice the steady hum of a machine designed to produce one particular outcome. "Mr. Mahmoud, did you personally inspect the scaffold on Block C of Caspian Heights on the date indicated?" This was the moment. The question I'd known was coming for 4 months. 2 answers. One would protect the company, preserve the lie, and keep me safe. Safe behind a signature. Safe inside the story Junaid had built. Safe the way Pervez had been safe when he closed his office door and told me to sign. The other answer would detonate my career. Expose the cover-up. Hand Junaid the weapon to prosecute me, and give Inaya's mother the case she'd spent a year building from the apartment next door. I looked at the courtroom. Cold fluorescent light. A judge who looked like he'd heard 1,000 versions of this story. Dua in the gallery. Inaya on her lap. The child coloring in a book. Coloring in a courtroom. While the adults above her decided what her father's death was worth. I thought about Pervez's office. The closed door. The arithmetic. I thought about Kamran Rashid's passport photograph, the man who tried not to blink. I thought about the barbecue video, the bad dancing, the complete commitment. I thought about a 3-year-old who drew her dead father next to a man she called Assad Bai, because she decided he belonged in her family portrait. Because children don't understand conflict of interest, they only understand proximity and kindness. No, I said. I did not inspect the scaffold. I was instructed to sign the report without inspection by the site manager, Pervez Shah, who told me my contract would be terminated if I refused. I signed it under duress. The scaffold had been flagged by 2 workers as unstable in the week before the collapse. Those flags were verbal and were not documented because the project was behind schedule and the penalty clause made delays expensive. The courtroom shifted. Not dramatically. Courtrooms don't gasp, despite what films suggest. But the energy changed. The way air changes before weather. Junaid's face went white. Not with surprise. He'd wargamed this possibility. With fury. The cold, professional fury of a man whose case has just been disassembled by his own witness. Mr. Mahmoud, I remind you that you are under oath, and that contradicting a signed safety document constitutes an admission of falsification. I know. I falsified the report. I'm telling you that now, under oath, in front of a judge. I'm also telling you that I was directed to do so by a company official, and that the company used the falsified report to deflect liability onto a scaffolding contractor who was not at fault. I looked past Junaid at Dua. Inaya was still coloring. Dua was not. She was watching me with an expression I finally recognized. The same expression she'd had in my doorway the night she said she knew who I was. Not anger. Not triumph. Relief. The specific relief of a person who has been holding a truth alone for so long that hearing someone else say it feels like setting down a weight she'd forgotten was heavier than her. The judge asked for silence. Dua's lawyer, Advocate Marine, who'd taken the case pro bono after the initial lawyer couldn't afford to continue, requested that Pervez Shah be called for testimony. The request was granted. Pervez was subpoenaed. He appeared 3 days later, immaculate in a gray suit, and denied everything. Denied the instruction. Denied the closed door. Denied the month-to-month contract threat. He testified with the steady confidence of a man who'd been lying professionally for 15 years and had never been caught. But the inspection report now had 2 contradictory testimonies attached to it, and the judge ordered the scaffold's maintenance records unsealed. Records that Harman had argued were proprietary and protected by commercial confidentiality. The records showed what the workers had said. Base plate displacement of 14 millimeters, more than double the safety threshold. Load modifications adding 900 kilograms to a structure rated for 600. A scaffolding contractor's flag sent by email to Harman's site office that read, "Base plates require immediate releveling. Do not load additional platforms until corrected." The email had been received. It had been filed. It had not been acted on. The scaffold had been loaded anyway, and Kamran Rashid had climbed it, and the base plates had shifted, and the crossbeam had fallen 9 stories. The ruling took 6 weeks. The judge found Harman Construction liable for negligent safety oversight and willful disregard of known structural risks. The settlement was revised from 42 lakh to 3 crore and 20 lakh. A number that wouldn't bring Kamran back, but would let Inaya grow up without the specific poverty of a child whose father's death was priced at the cost of a mid-range car. Pervez Shah was referred for criminal investigation. The judge noted in his ruling that Pervez's testimony had been inconsistent with the documentary record, judicial language for he lied under oath. The investigation is ongoing. Pervez has retained his own lawyer, separate from Harman's, which is the corporate equivalent of a rat chewing through the hull of the ship it's been living on. Harman Construction filed a criminal complaint against me for falsification of a safety document, exactly as Junaid had promised. My lawyer, the one who told me to stop talking, says the complaint will likely result in a suspended sentence and a permanent bar from safety certification, given my voluntary confession and cooperation. I'll never work in construction again. The industry that killed Kamran Rashid will close its doors to the one person who admitted why. I knew that when I took the stand. Dua came to see me the evening after the verdict. Not next door. I'd moved out of the Garden Town apartment by then into a smaller place in Satellite Town because the courtyard wall between our lives had become too thin for the weight of what was on both sides of it. She stood in my doorway. Inaya wasn't with her. "You moved," she said. "You needed distance. From the witness. For the appeal period." I didn't ask for distance. You didn't need to. Junaid's team will argue witness collusion. The further apart we are during the appeal, the harder that argument is to make. She looked at me. "Is that why you moved? Legal strategy?" "Partly. What's the other part?" "I signed a report that killed your husband. And then I fell in love with his widow. And I can't figure out whether those two facts cancel each other out or make each other worse, and I think I need to be in a different apartment to find out." She stepped into the doorway. Not all the way in, just past the threshold. "Inaya asks about you every day. She wants to know where Assad Bai went. I told her you moved for work." She said, "But his work is here. We're his work." The sentence hit me harder than the verdict. "I can't tell her the truth," Dua said. "Not yet. She's 3. But one day she'll be old enough to understand that the man who signed the paper that killed her father was also the man who stood in a courtroom and told the truth about it, and that both of those things are the same person. And I need her to know you when that day comes." "Why?" "Because you didn't leave. Most men would have. When I told you I knew who you were, when I told you I'd moved in on purpose, any reasonable person would have called a lawyer and disappeared. You stayed. You kept bringing Inaya coloring books. You sat in my kitchen and listened to stories about Kamran, and you didn't defend yourself once. And when you finally confessed, you did it with my daughter on your lap." Her voice cracked. "That's not a person I'm letting go. Dua, not yet. I told you, not while the appeal is open." But when it's closed, she looked at the doorway she was standing in. "This door stays open. You understand? I understand." She didn't touch me. She didn't need to. She turned and walked down the corridor, and her footsteps sounded like every other time she'd walked away from me. Measured, deliberate. The footsteps of a woman who builds cases out of proximity and patience, and the specific cruelty of letting you see exactly who you've harmed before asking you to make it right. She won't let me go. She told me that. She said it like a fact, like arithmetic, like the calculation Pervez made when he told me to sign the report. Except her math was different. Her math said, "You owe a debt that can't be paid in money, and the only currency I'll accept is the rest of your honesty, and I'm going to stand next door and wait for you to deliver it, however long it takes. I'm still delivering. I'll be delivering for a long time. The door is still open." Most men leave the moment they see the widow next door. They leave because grief is heavy and guilt is heavier, and the combination of the two is a weight most people would rather drive across the city to escape. I didn't leave, not because I'm brave. Because a 3-year-old drew me into her family portrait, and her mother let me stay long enough to understand that the picture was more accurate than anything I'd ever signed. Have you ever realized that the person who should have hated you most, the one you wronged, the one who had every reason to shut you out and walk away, chose instead to stand close enough that you couldn't hide from what you'd done, and that their closeness was the only thing that made you brave enough to stop hiding? And if you're honest, truly honest, Is there someone you owe a truth to right now, today, that you've been holding behind a signature you wish you'd never written? Tell me. Not the version where you were the hero. The one where you were the report. If this one landed somewhere you weren't ready for, subscribe. The next story is about a woman who moved next door on purpose. But in that one, the man she moved next to didn't stay. He ran. And she followed. And the door she opened wasn't his. It was a courtroom's.